our final speaker, very many people in the room and online know him. You've seen him in his comedy special, Libertas. You've seen him on Fox News. You may listen to his podcast, Part of the Problem. We have the one, the only, great Dave Smith.
Thank you, guys. That was very nice of you. Thank you guys for having me. This is a great event. Thanks everyone joining virtually online. I promise there will be no flowcharts in this speech that I had. That was great. I was looking through all those flowcharts, and the whole time I'm just thinking, who the hell would want to move to this country after the last year that we've been through? Like, who's looking at this and going, that's still better than what I have going on? I guess we should. I like to, before every speech I give a serious note. I thank our Lord and Savior. I'm talking Governor Murphy for letting us have this wonderful event. I mean, it's a little bit limited, but at least we're allowed to go outside. I was listening, so I was driving here with Rob Bernstein, who's my co-host on my podcast. Yeah, he's phenomenal, and he's a little disappointed there wasn't more food, but he's a sport. He's happy to be here. But so I was listening just to the video. I don't know if you guys remember. So it's a little less than a year ago, in April of last year, when our governor, Murphy, was on Tucker Carlson's show. And Tucker Carlson, feel however you do about him. He's good on some things and bad on some things. But he gave him a really tough interview. And there were very few, at this point, this is April of 2020, no one was giving these governors tough interviews at this point. And Tucker Carlson asked what should have been the easiest question for anyone to ask one of these governors. So Governor Murphy had just arrested about 20 Jewish people for the crime of going to synagogue. And, for all of the accusations about, anti-Semitism that get thrown around on Twitter, when the state's arresting Jews for going to synagogue, that's just, normal business, like nothing to worry about there. So Tucker Carlson asked him, he said, well, I've read the First Amendment a few times, and this seems to violate it. So where do you get the authority in the Bill of Rights to arrest someone for the crime of going to church or synagogue? And Governor Murphy, with no hesitation, replied, that's above my pay grade. That was his exact words. What an amazing moment, right, for a libertarian to witness. And then he followed up by saying, I wasn't really thinking about the Bill of Rights. That's what we've been living through the last year, that these governors have just decided that they've repealed the Bill of Rights. Even in the just horrific George W. Bush administration, when he'd be instituting torture and invading countries, and they'd always have some loose justification of how this was constitutional. Now, don't get me wrong, it was complete bullshit, but they'd have something to tell you. Well, Congress has to declare the war. Well, Congress gave an authorization to the president to use force, so even though it's not a technical, declaration, it's not really a war, it's a military action, or they had some type of rationalization. But over this last year, the governors simply told you, we don't care. We don't care about the Bill of Rights. That just doesn't apply, because there's a virus. So that's that. I don't know if there are a clause in the Constitution that says all of this, unless there's a virus, then none of this applies. I don't think so. These governors appointed themselves as dictators over the last year. There's no other way to describe it. That's what happened, and it's a real amazing thing for a libertarian to live through, for a New Jerseyan to live through. That Governor Murphy just became the secular dictator of New Jersey. If he was in the Middle East, the military would be launching a regime change war against him, or I don't know, Scott, how does it work? Maybe giving them weapons and arming them or something like that. Yeah, one than the other. Maybe they'd be funding the rebels to overthrow him. Honestly, we might be the rebels in that case. The federal government might be funding the New Jersey Libertarian Party to overthrow the evil dictator. You know what? I'm actually starting to get sold on this. This is. Of course, I'm not advocating any of this, but but what an interesting time to be a libertarian when you believe in human liberty and you've watched it crack down on across this country like never before. And one of the things that I've always loved about libertarianism and libertarians is that we are great at addressing the crises that the country is facing. And I think we're more needed now than ever. I remember, I was actually telling Scott on the phone the other day, I was talking to Scott, and I was telling him this memory I have of, I was in the 7th grade, And I had this very left-leaning history teacher who, now I didn't know anything about politics or philosophy or any of this stuff, but I was a smartass. And she was teaching us about communism. And she said that communism was this philosophy, what you guys may have heard this before, that works really well on paper, but doesn't work so well in practice. And I remember as a little 7th grade asshole, I raised my hand and I said, that's stupid. Because I didn't know anything, but I knew enough to know that that's really stupid. If something doesn't work in practice, then it doesn't work on paper. That doesn't make any sense. That's like, oh, this is a really great car. Oh, let's go to the supermarket. Well, it doesn't drive. Then it's not a really great car. If you have a really great blueprint for a building, but if you build it, it will collapse and kill people, then that's not a great blueprint. And communism doesn't work on paper because it doesn't work in practice. And libertarianism is awesome because it works in practice. That's all that matters. If it didn't, then we're all idiots who are wasting our time here. But we know that it does. And it has worked all over the world. Maybe not in the purest form that we'd like to see it, but it's worked everywhere that it's been tried to the degree that it's been tried. I became a libertarian because of the Ron Paul campaigns. That was what inspired me and inspired a lot of people to become libertarians. And the Ron Paul moment against Giuliani are all the great things that got people interested in libertarianism. It was never because Ron Paul was sitting there and saying, well, you know, I believe in the non-aggression principle, and if you think about it, this is a really logically consistent philosophy. He wasn't just talking about abstractions. He was talking about the crises that the nation was going through. He was saying, here's why we're dealing with 9/11 and the war in Afghanistan and the war in Iraq. Here's why we're dealing with the economic crisis in 2008. This is what's happening to the country, and I can explain to you why this happened, what the causes are, and what the solutions are. He knew that he was addressing a country that was in a dangerous place, and he was giving them the solutions and the root causes of the problem. And then, after realizing that this guy had all the answers, I was like, how the hell does he have all the answers? And you realized he got them from his philosophy. And that's the role of libertarianism, as I see it. That we have to explain to as many of the American people as we can that we can actually save the country. It's not just that we have these ideas, and far too often, I think libertarians, myself included, because we love the philosophy so much, we get into these abstract arguments with each other, and we can spend hours debating anarchy versus minarchy, and all this stuff is removed from what's right in front of us. And what's right in front of us is a crushing debt that we're handing off to our children, mini dictators in pretty much all 50, I guess 48 states now. Thanks, Texas and Florida, for being cool. But we've got all of the wars still raging on. We've got a militarized police who are enforcing all of these lockdown orders, and these are the problems. And I don't think that anyone at this point could argue that the country isn't spinning out of control. And it's in many different ways. Everyone feels it. I used to in the Ron Paul days when he was running for president, I would get on, I started getting on these like Fox News shows, and then I worked for CNN for a year, and I'd talk to these guys about how the country was on a suicide mission. And back then it would kind of be like, that seems a little hyperbolic. But it doesn't anymore. I talk to people now about how this whole thing is spinning out of control, and even in the corporate press world, they're like, yeah, no, it sure is. But the thing is, they don't understand why. They don't understand why. I don't know if you guys saw George W. Bush, who ruined the 21st century. He came out yesterday to condemn the Capitol riot because if there's one thing George W. Bush hates, it's a violent insurrection. That is, he will not stand for that, at least not here. I don't know. But so he came out and he's giving this interview, and he said at one point, he goes, there's just so much anger out there, and it's really ugly. And it's like, yeah, okay, George W. Bush, there is a lot of anger out there, and yeah, it is ugly, but do you ever think maybe you have a little bit of responsibility for it? What do you think happened to this country in the last 20 years? Well, you got the first 8 years of it, and you blew it. And this is something also that the entire right wing in America has to accept and bear some responsibility for. I mean, I suppose if you're a 20-year-old now, you're off the hook. But the right wing in America largely supported George W. Bush. The right wingers complain that they have no influence on the culture, which is true. If you turn on television, you don't see a lot of church-going, families who are waiting till, marriage to have sex or whatever, a right-winger would want to see. Hollywood is very progressive, and the corporate press is very progressive, and academia and politics in general, and, the deep state and the military, they're all pushing kind of diversity and inclusion, and they're not right-wingers. But when was the last time the right wing had a lot of control in the country? What was post 9/11? We were in a right-wing culture. It was about military and nationalism and patriotism and all of this kind of traditional right-wing hierarchy. And so the right wing had a say in the culture, and they blew it on George H.W. Bush's idiot son. As Scott Horton likes to say, not even Ronald Reagan's son. George H.W. Bush's son. And as I like to add, not even George H.W. Bush's smart son. His idiot son. And they blew it on him. And they blew it on a war that slaughtered 1 million people, that just, cost us trillions of dollars. We had artificially low interest rates to keep the wars on the credit card and not make, so they could be seen as like, oh, look, these wars are basically free. As long as we keep interest rates down at 1.5%, who cares, right? We can just borrow it and put it on the debt. Except those low interest rates also, convinced a lot of people who otherwise wouldn't have to buy homes. And then when the interest rates ticked back up, what happened? We had the crash of 2008. So the last time the country went all in on the right-wingers, we got 2 disastrous wars that we're still in to this goddamn day. These wars were still in, with no victory in sight. All we have to show for it is the crying mothers of soldiers who have committed suicide, which is still happening every day in this country. That's what the right wing went all in on, and an economic crash that came after it. So when, George W. Bush goes, why is there all this anger? Maybe he should think about that a little bit. And when the right-wingers go, why does the left control the culture completely? Maybe they should think about that a little bit. Now, on the other side, these dummy left-wingers, okay, they've took control of the culture, and what do they get for it? Nothing. I mean, they had this whole Black Lives Matter movement after last year, these mass protests. What reform have they gotten? Anywhere. How has life been made better for the average black person in America? Or more importantly, the average poor black person in America who we'd actually care enough to help? Nothing. Because they're so distracted by this wokeism, which is pushed by all the big banks, the giant corporations, the whole military-industrial complex. It's pushed because it makes sure you never focus on them, right? What do you focus on? Aunt Jemima. That's what the BLM protests achieved. We got rid of pancakes that people seem to like. They've been selling them for years. I don't know what the problem is. But that's it. So what is the role of libertarianism here? Well, I mean, it seems pretty obvious to me, right? It's to refocus all of this. Make the right-wingers better and the left-wingers better to the best that we can. To try to get them to realize that there are these issues that you might support now, but they're going to end up destroying you in the long run. And they will, and they have been. And that the libertarians really, we're the only ones who have something interesting to say about the culture war. I've talked to a lot of libertarians who say we should ignore the culture war, which I think is completely wrong. I think that is completely wrong. And libertarians go, well, we don't really have a say. We just believe, you can be free, so we have nothing to say about this culture war. Well, the culture war is consuming the country. And if you have nothing to say about it, then you're not going to have anything to add. Most people vote for cultural reasons. I wish that they were reading economic treatises and then deciding which one they like better, but that's not what it is, right? I mean, we all know the Democrats and Republicans are pretty much the same. So why are people so passionately for one or the other? Well, it's because that's their culture, and those politicians tend to pander to their culture. But we have a unique opportunity here to come in and say, we're the only ones offering the following. A truce. That's what libertarians can offer in the culture war. We can declare a truce in this culture war and not have to fight it. And I really believe in my heart, a lot of people are getting tired of this shit. A lot of people don't want to fight a culture war anymore. They don't want to go through all of their friends and what their opinions are. They don't want to worry about saying the wrong thing in public, or they'll get fired from their job. People are tired of this. And how would we ever resolve this short of a civil war? And how does that work out? What are we going to do? Just start killing each other? This is a disaster. It'll tear us all apart. So the only obvious solution that libertarians can propose is this. What are we really fighting over? Well, it's control of the government. That's really what it is. Why do you think the culture war spikes every 4 years? Because one side's going to win and one side's going to lose. And the side that loses will be ruled over by the other side. It drives left-wingers crazy that Donald Trump was their president, and understandably so. They don't like that guy. Why should they be under his rule? And it drives right-wingers crazy that Joe Biden or Hillary Clinton or Barack Obama or Kamala Harris will be their president. And they have every right to feel that way too. So what's the libertarian solution? It's this simple. Make the government not that powerful, and you don't have to fight a culture war over it. That's the answer. Declare a truce. It doesn't matter. I know, downtown Brooklyn is going to have a very different culture than rural Alabama. Okay? That's fine. You don't have to enforce your culture on them, and they don't have to enforce their culture on you, and we can live and let live. And really, that's the only practical answer. So I just reject the idea that libertarians shouldn't talk about the culture war. I think we have something far more valuable, far more important to add to this conversation, because everyone else is just in the latest fight over Mr. Potato Head or whatever, something stupid, They shouldn't be gendered, and then you're like, you're so stupid for thinking they shouldn't be gendered, and this has nothing to do with anything, And that's really what it comes down to. I wanted to talk to you guys a little bit about libertarian infighting as well, because this is something that we're all very familiar with, and myself as well. I've participated in quite a bit of it, if you're familiar with me. And it's, there's something about the libertarian infighting that's really great in a way. There's not the same level of Republican infighting or Democratic infighting. Not to say that there isn't any, but it's not quite as intense as with libertarians. Like, we really argue with each other. We argue with people who we agree on 99.9% of things on, about the other 1%, like, a lot. And part of it makes sense in a way, right? Like, we're not here just because this was the thing to do. I mean, most people who are Democrats, like I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, most people are Democrats there. And the reason they're Democrats is because most people there are Democrats. There's no more to it than that. That's why you're a Democrat, because, like, obviously, Republicans are the bad guys and the Democrats are the good guys. And same thing in red states. This is why most people are Republicans. It's like, well, my daddy was a Republican and his daddy was a Republican, and so I'm a Republican. I'm not one of the bad guys, I'm the good guy. And it's that simple. None of them are there because no one's like, oh my God, I read this book that just changed my life and I became a Democrat. You know what I mean? Like, that's our story, not theirs. So we're here because we actually believe in something, and what we believe in happens to be a philosophy of individualism, so it's very easy to argue with people because we really care about these ideas. So in a sense, that's beautiful. Like, and we should argue about all types of contentious issues within libertarianism. But we also have to realize what we're up against and what we're actually dealing with here. And what we're dealing with is a federal government that commits genocide in foreign countries. I mean, I don't know what other word to use it at a certain point. We have killed millions of people in the Middle East and Northern Africa just since 9/11. Forget about all the stuff before that Scott was talking about. Forget about Vietnam and the world wars and everything else, Korean War, and all the other little things that just aren't as important wars that happened in between those. We have millions of corpses on the hands of our federal government. We have the biggest incarceration state in the world, or damn near close, I think, in raw numbers, the biggest. We have a militarized police. We have an economy that is completely overregulated, and people's lives are ruined due to just incredibly burdensome compliance and license laws and all types of things. I mean, people's lives are really ruined. And of course, in the last year, we've turned into what I just don't think can be described as anything other than a totalitarian police state. Now, it may not be as brutal as some totalitarian police states in the world, but, like, the word totalitarian gets thrown out too often. It does. But what else would you describe the last year in America? That you have people sitting at home watching the TV to find out from their governors what they're allowed to do. Like to every most intimate detail in life, what you're allowed to do. Can I have a funeral for my father? Can I go to work? Can I see my family? Can I go with my wife to her next sonogram appointment? Everything. Your governor is dictating to you what you can and can't do. So that's what we're up against. And if we're up against that and we can't shake off our minor little disagreements and come together and realize that, hey, if you oppose the lockdowns, you oppose the warfare state, you oppose the bailouts of the big banks and the giant corporations, just the pillaging of the American people, if you oppose the war on drugs and you oppose people being locked up for nonviolent crimes, I'm sorry. That's good enough to be on the same team. If we're all on that team, then let's brush off some of these disagreements and let's try to work together. And I have not been perfect on this in the past, but I am really going to try to be better on that going forward, because I just think that the fight that we're in right now is that damn important. That we're up against pretty insurmountable odds as it is, and if we can't all be together, then this is impossible. So let's give ourselves a fighting chance and try to be. I will work with anyone. I'll work with Nick Sarwark if me and him can work together and get something done. I will. Listen, I heard he didn't. Yes, listen, obviously, I won the debate, sir. I was there, believe me. But I use him as an example to make the point that, honestly, if we can get something done, then I'll work with anybody who can help us in that cause. And I think that should be the attitude going forward. And I will say this to anyone in the room who's not, perhaps familiar with me or, like the Mises Caucus. I've done a lot of work with them, and I have a lot of good friends in that caucus. We've brought a fair amount of people into the Libertarian Party. And I have some plans going forward to bring a lot more people into the party. I'm really going to try to use everything in me to put more focus and energy on this party and bring more people in. And I would just ask that, given what we're up against, the people in the party who are not in the Mises Caucus and the people in the party who aren't in our camp or whatever, please keep an open mind and give these people a chance as they come in. View this as your reinforcements coming to help, okay? That we're in this together and that we need more people to be drawn into the movement. And if you give them a chance, I promise you I will make sure that they give you a chance. And let's try to get some liberty unity shit going for the next year. Let's make that a focus because, man, look at this country. We need a liberty moment in this country badly. And there's a big opportunity. Okay, there's a huge opportunity in front of libertarians right now. And this is why I joined the Libertarian Party, because I could see this a few years ago when I joined. That it's like, look, Trump is obviously going to fail. And I don't mean just fail like according to left-wingers who hate Trump. I mean by Trump's own stated goals. None of this is going to work. And then obviously the Democrats are going to run some horrible Democrat against them, and that's not going to work by what left progressives want either. They got Joe Biden. They got the architect of the incarceral state as the Black Lives Matter champion. Like, how long do you think that's going to go good for, you know? And so we really have an opportunity going forward because we have real answers to real problems, and I hope we can come together and do something really meaningful and important for this country that desperately needs it. So thank you guys so much for having me. Thank you. And yeah, I'm happy to take some questions. How long did I go for? I never have any idea with these things. An hour. I mean, honestly. Oh. Well, I get up here, I'm always like, I think I got about 10 minutes to 90 minutes of things to talk about. It's somewhere in there. About 10 minutes of questions or so. Okay, sure. Who wants to go?
Hey Dave, big fan. We've met before, but I'm probably the most conservative person in this room. Like, I also happen to vehemently believe that the election was, in fact, rigged in Joe Biden's favor. Mm-hmm. So even if the Libertarian Party were to garner, like, tremendous support, what makes you think that the beast, aka the government, would just, like, kind of just roll over? I know you don't think they would roll over, but what makes you think that you would be able to, the Libertarian Party would be able to influence the government in order to, shrink themselves?
Oh, if the Libertarian Party was ever feasibly close to actually overtaking the government, I am convinced that there would be a wild crackdown. I don't think they would let us in. I mean, I think they might overthrow democracy in general. Sometimes we just think about these things on paper. We have no idea what we're up against. I mean, you're talking about the biggest honeypot in the history of humanity. I mean, just trillions of dollars. And they make this money by bombing children, you know? So they're killers who are protecting trillions of dollars. What do you think they'll do if their trillions of dollars are threatened? I wouldn't put killing past them. So we're not really, I don't think, in the game of overtaking this federal government. I think we're in the game of trying to have local and state wins where we can and make, you know, good reforms that add a little bit of freedom to people's lives. And we're in the game of speaking to the remnant and trying to wake people up, because that's what actually moves things. Like Thomas Paine wrote pamphlets. That's all he did. He just wrote pamphlets, but he changed the course of history with those pamphlets. So ideas are powerful. And just to your point about the election being stolen from Donald Trump, I mean, I'll say I never saw any evidence that backed up some of the claims that Trump's lawyers were making. But there is no question that the election was, in a sense, stolen in plain sight from him. I mean, the entire corporate press apparatus was mobilized against him. They framed him for being a Russian agent for 3 years. They dug up every lie, every dirty trick, and that Hunter Biden laptop story, whatever value you think it is, we're kind of focused on bigger issues, but that was a real story. And you had tech companies that froze one of the biggest newspapers in America simply because they had the nerve to run what was a very newsworthy story. That was his laptop. This has been verified up and down at this point. The Biden administration never even claimed it wasn't. That's how you know it's his laptop. And people are like, well, why would he go take it to this laptop? He's a crackhead, okay? That's why. That's why he took it there, okay? Because the guy's a crackhead, and he was that old Dave Chappelle joke. He's a crackhead. He had moves to make, crack to smoke, you know? So that's that. So thank you for your question.
Any questions online?
Yeah, I have a question for Dave. You said
I
you.
think you're muted, Nikhil. Are you talking?
Hey, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
We don't hear you.
We don't hear you.
Hello? Hello? Can you guys hear me?
We don't hear you.
We hear him on the Zoom.
Is it us? It might be us.
It's you. We hear the Zoom.
Okay, we're gonna move to a question here.
You see how
while I'm
quickly
working on-
that turned, where we're like, turn your mic on, idiot. And then the next person comes up, you're like, that's probably on our end. Then, you know what? You know, that might be us.
Well, I accidentally got handed the mic, so yes. So I will have I will ask the question. So thank you for your presentation. Now, you raised this. You said that our country is pretty much a totalitarian, turning into a totalitarian police state, and you raised this question on how else would you call it? And I have this bad habit of picking up rhetorical questions. So. So I think there is an important dividing line within the party in particular, between seeing the problem as U.S. drifting towards totalitarian police state, as you're suggesting, and seeing the U.S. and basically using F word, that is U.S. turning into proto-fascist state. And I think, and we got close to this conversation to you the other night, and I think the issue is linked to those two other talking points that you mentioned about, on one hand, cancel culture and culture war, etc., and on another hand, corporate press and big banks, etc., because the real problem that we are facing is whether it is still the totalitarian government that we are facing, or whether this is the entire society that's going fascist, and yet still covered by thinning layer of liberal democracy.
Yeah.
So, what's the question? Dave asked the question, how else would you call it? And this is the question: whether you would explicitly rule out this fascist qualification in favor of this totalitarian policy.
Well, I think that what gets it's all kind of about how you define fascism, right? And so in the popular imagination, fascism, the term has become synonymous with Nazism. And so what people think of in terms of fascism is not only just the Nazi state, but the worst of the Nazi crimes. So you think killing 6 million Jews, right? Like that's what fascism is. So if you define it as that, then no, we're not at that type of point. Hitler was a unique evil. I mean, I suppose you could compare Mao Zedong or Stalin or a few other people to him, but he was, even amongst them, killed so many people in such a short period of time. Really, he has a claim to be the most evil leader of an evil regime that's ever existed. However, there were other fascist countries also, right, that were not like Mussolini. If you look at his definition of fascism, so the kind of grandfather of fascism, his own definition was a merger of corporate and state power, and certainly we have that. We have a soft participatory fascism in America. And you're right that there is a culture that is certainly embracing. There's a whole lot of would-be authoritarians out there, right? A lot of people who are quite happy to call in that fascist police force on someone for maybe not being enough feet away from their neighbor or not wearing a mask or something like that, right? So there's a lot of people like that, but all of those people have been poisoned by the fascist state. And I don't think that's like a reach to say. They've literally been educated in their indoctrination camps. They've been propagandized by the corporations that the government is in bed with. And so I think the problems are all one and the same. But no, I wouldn't be against calling what we have a fascist state. I think it's probably the most accurate description.
Okay, do we have anybody online now? We should have audio online. Nikhil, did you have something, or is it Nikhil?
Oh, yeah, it was actually just a stupid question. So, but yeah, I just wanted to ask Dave. I mean, you said you would work with anyone for the unity movement, but even Dick Cheney?
Well, that was a good question. Well, my friend, if he gets the nomination, I'm obligated to support him. I wouldn't. What I said was there are lines, right? So my thing is, first off, if you are not anti-war, then I'm not particularly interested in working with you. If you are, to me, there's no more important, like if we're libertarians and we care about the initiation of violence and the state having a monopoly on the initiation of violence, well, what's worse than murdering children? To me, like, I'm a father, I care about people. If you're for murdering kids, I'm not with you. But if there's a minimum requirement, as I said, being against the lockdowns, against the wars, against the corporate bailouts, against innocent people, nonviolent, victimless crimes, people being thrown in jail, that stuff. But if you're good on all that stuff, I can get past whatever other, little issues you have. So no Dick Cheney.
And I guess I just wanted to ask, how are you liking Jersey? Moving from here.
Well, judging on a scale of New York to New Jersey, Jersey's doing better. But it's really, I love New York City, like with all my heart and soul. I was born and raised in New York. I spent my entire life there, the entire first 37 years of my life. And it is truly heartbreaking what they've done to that city. They've destroyed it. And I don't know if it'll ever come back. It's a really, really depressing place to be these days. It's just awful. There's boarded up stores and, people Times Square is still a ghost town today. It's creepy and weird and awful. But I got a wife and a daughter, so my obligations are to them and to make sure they're okay. So I had to get out. Yeah, baby steps. I'm going to be on a farm in Montana before you know it, but I'm going like one state at a time.
That's how we're losing the cultural war.
Yeah.
Because the left has been taking baby steps toward what they're doing now.
What's the?
It's gotten tired over the last few years, and they're starting to take large steps.
Well, right. What's that? The saying. It's like, how did you lose your money? Like slowly at first and then all at once, or something, right? Like that's kind of like how we lost freedom in this country, right? Like slowly at first and then all of a sudden at once. And it really is. It's something to look back on now. I highly recommend if no one has, because I've been doing it just because we kind of hit like the 1 year mark. If go look back on like cable news interviews and governor press conferences from about a year ago today, because this is when it's so easy to see through it. You're like, wow, they just lied their asses off, got everyone scared to death. It reminds me of when they were selling the war in Iraq, like in 2002. I mean, you have these authority figures standing up there and telling you they were in on 9/11. And they're blah, 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 and they have weapons of mass destruction, and they're going to do all of this. And well, what do you want? You want a nuke to go off into Chicago tomorrow? Or do you want to fight this war? And you're like, I guess I want to fight the war. I don't know. And you look back at it and you go, it was all lies. It was all complete bullshit. And they knew it. And they knew it. This thing that just came out the other day with Cuomo, that the nursing homes were pleading with him. There was no mix-up. No one didn't know if you took COVID positive patient. And meanwhile, this bastard is justifying everything he's doing by, well, you don't want to kill grandma, right? And he's killing grandmas while he's doing it. That's what happened to us over this last year. It's disgusting. Yeah, and there's Murphy's even worse, but he didn't pinch anyone's ass, so he's okay, I guess. You can kill as many old people as you want, but don't crack any jokes with the ladies.
He lets his staffers do that.
Yeah, right.
Dave, I got a question for you.
Yeah, all right. Well, you invited me here, so you get one.
So you joined the National Libertarian Party and you're a dues-paying member. Mm-hmm. Will you sign up right now on the spot to be a dues-paying member of the New Jersey Libertarian Party?
All right, I'll do it.
Thank you, sir. That's recruiting 101, ladies and gentlemen.
That was nothing like a little peer pressure. We're like, hey, Dave, this is going pretty good so far. You want to leave with everyone hating you, or you want to be friends?
Send the text to Mike to let him know it's done.
All right.
You've got a history website up ready for you, so if you want to just fill that out right there.
All right. This is. It's just. I'm gonna leave.
Yeah, let him sit down first.
I'm gonna leave here with a Subaru or something like.
Speaking of the Subaru, let's go get the paper forms and have it in the physical. That'd be nice.
All right, I will happy to do that. Do we have time for another one, or?
We got time for one more. That's the question I was gonna ask.
So, Dave, you talked about militarized police before, and we run a civil rights group in New Jersey. The number one thing we hear about is Second Amendment issues in New Jersey with police departments. They are the ones that administer all these permits. We talk to libertarians all the time, right-wing people, GOP people. They'll tell you, I'm pro-Second Amendment, I'm pro-liberty. But ultimately, when it comes to defending their rights, they have to stand up to someone with a badge and tell them that they're breaking the law, right? And it's impossible. Whenever we tell them, this is what you have to do, you have to actually call this out and say something publicly, they all shy down. I'm going to get retaliated against, someone's going to find a plumbing permit I didn't file, or someone's going to arrest my kid, all the threats. How do we empower people, in your opinion, to get over that hump, that fear, and start speaking out against stuff like that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I've been saying for years that I would always try to really make this point to right-wingers that the biggest like contradiction in their worldview was their worship of the police. Because I'd always be like, you're so afraid that they're going to come take your guns. Well, it's not going to be some liberal arts gender studies major who comes and takes your guns from you. Like, if you're worried about him, you're fine. Who's going to do it? It's going to be your boys in blue. And I think there has been some progress on that front made in some senses. There's been some awakening on the right about the nature of the police after this last year, where they enforced. It was a mix of them enforcing all the lockdown rules and then also abandoning them in the face of all the rioting. I mean, like when the riots came, all this, if there was ever a justification for a militarized police, well, it came. There were roaming mobs rioting, killing people, beating people up, smashing in their stores, and you might think, well, at least we got a real strong police force. Nope. They had no interest in doing anything like that. They stood down and allowed it to happen. They're just as guilty of that for also their aggressive treatment of peaceful protesters, pepper spraying and throwing young girls to the floor and sickening things like that. So I think there is some awakening going on, and that's a positive. But I got to say, I don't want to give you a false sense of optimism here. The most disappointing thing to me about the last year of the state of America, and in many ways the most terrifying thing about the state of where we are in America, was how little resistance there was from the right wing. That it was unbelievable to watch it happen. There was no resistance, but it was really just pathetic. We had a march here or there. I mean, I used to always say, if they ever came to take the guns, there'd be a civil war in this country because these right-wingers aren't giving up their guns. And I really got to re-examine that after the last year. I mean, they let them take their churches. I mean, what is more precious to right-wing America than your church? And they took that from you. They locked it down. They said, by order of the government, you can't go to church. And more or less, the reaction from the right wing was, that's bullshit. And they took it. Now, I mean, I'm just saying, if you look at what Murphy did to this state, what Cuomo did to New York, and what pretty much all the red state governors did too, with one or two exceptions, this is far more tyranny than King George ever put on the colonies. Far more, not even comparable, okay? The right-wingers today aren't the same as the Patriots back in the day, and that's a real concerning thing. So I don't know. Keep preaching the message to them, and we'll see. I wish I had a better answer for you.
Like Trump or not, they took the town square from him and said you aren't allowed to use it.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right.
He said a thing.
Yeah, I mean, look, and obviously there are some libertarians who will look at this and in my opinion, somewhat autistically, say, well, they're a private company, so they can do whatever they want. And it's like, listen, you got to focus on the bigger picture here. First off, these companies are largely founded and funded by the CIA and all types of other government organizations. But you are allowed to, in the same way that if businesses started popping up and throwing whites-only signs outside their doors, I don't think any of us libertarians would hesitate for a second to be like, hey, this is a dangerous precedent to set. And if one of us were to go, well, we're a private company, you'd be like, yeah, that's pretty stupid if you don't see what's going on here. And the fact that they could silence the sitting president of the United States of America, that they would not let, the guy has the nuclear football, but not a Twitter password. I mean, that is something that you look at, they go, I mean, if they can silence that guy, they can silence any of us. And libertarians, here's the thing, right? The whole new world order, to use that phrase, right, as you can tell, is corporate wokeism. This is what they are pushing down all of us. This is why Joe Biden's entire administration was picked based on their race or gender. This is why J.P. Morgan Chase and the CIA and the Pentagon are pushing diversity training and all of this stuff. They like this. Whether you agree with the spirit of wokeism or you reject the spirit of wokeism, you can't deny that all the powers that be love it. And you know why they love it? Because it keeps us pitted against each other and not focused on the real issues. So J.P. Morgan Chase, you know, they look at Occupy Wall Street, you know, they're like, oof, I don't know about that. They look at some woke, you know, conversation about transgender microaggressions, and they're like, that's really important stuff over there. We gotta really elevate that conversation because that's what matters, you know? And so they're pushing all of this stuff, and the right wingers are a threat to that. So they don't like that because they're a threat to their, in the same way that, you know, Iran isn't a threat to America, but they are a threat to America dominating Iran, right? So the right wingers are a threat to the establishment in a sense of their ability to dominate them. And what libertarians need to wake up to is that we're hoping to grow this thing into a point that we're a threat to them. But keep that in mind, that if we were ever successful, we'd actually be a much greater threat to their power source than these guys are right now. So if you're celebrating what they're doing to who they perceive to be a threat to them, just keep in mind, you know, imagine there was a real movement to end the Fed in this country. You think you wouldn't end up being the racist real quick? Do you think it matters if you were like, but we were good on criminal justice reform for the last 30 years? No one cares. No one cares. Yeah. Well, that's I like to say. You'll be taking a convertible ride through Dallas. So, yeah.
So, what?
30 days for calling someone's argument.
Yeah. Well, there you go.
You're Nazi. We're going to take any questions online. Are there any questions online? I'm not hearing any. So, I think we're going to call it. Yeah. Okay. Oh, wait. There is one online. Shall we take Eve's question? Go ahead, Eve. Oh, Eve, did you have a question?
Yeah. Well, I'm a bit confused. You said if you're looking at something in an autistic way, I don't quite understand what that means. And there are a large number of autistic people in
I didn't hear the question completely. I didn't mean it in a literal sense. I mean that if you were looking at something, completely removed from the human element of it and just looking at it as if it was something on a piece of paper. So in a libertarian textbook, you might look at this and say, okay, these are private companies. But in a more deep understanding of the human factors that go into this, you realize that we are building something here that's very dangerous. And that's all I meant by that comment. All right, thank you guys so much. I appreciate it.